traveled a bunch this summer, so I'm a little behind, but I'm glad I
Yeah.
don't have a second paper. I worked ahead on
No.
this thing, so yeah.
Well, no, I think the papers can be turned in together, right? So like
Yeah,
same document. You don't have to
yeah, I've
separate them.
got it that
Just
way. Yeah.
yeah. That's that was it. That, I was going to mention that in class too with the other one. So
And I think it's nice to
well,
have
I'm
a
glad you
mix of
liked it.
sort of, yeah, I think it's nice to have a mix of sort of experiential stuff and research stuff. I like the different learning opportunities. So,
Good. Okay.
and I liked
That's
getting to
great.
meet my partner. Yeah, it was cool to get to
Yeah.
meet somebody in
Who
the
are
class
you
and sit
with?
on. I
Who
was
are you
with
partnered with?
Rachel Rice, so we had the same last name, so that's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was really nice to
Gotcha.
meet her.
Good. You said you have someone going to school, like going to college?
Yeah, my son leaves for college. My first kiddo to go to college, he leaves on a week from Wednesday. So on the 6th, actually Tuesday on the 16th.
16th, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're 2 years away from that, but we go back to back. So I've got a sophomore and a freshman
Okay. I have a gap.
in
I
high
have a
school.
junior and yeah, I have my kids are 19 months apart, but they have 2 years apart in school. So we get a year off. Yeah. You'll it's a thing. So this year you're doing, well, you told me you have sophomore and freshman, so you're a little early. Yeah, you're gonna by junior year, you start doing visits and all that stuff.
Yeah, my oh shoot, I missed someone. I don't know what happened.
And someone
Yeah,
dropped
my
off.
daughter, yeah, my daughter has decided, I don't know where this came. My daughter's decided that she wants to go to Oxford,
Oh, cool.
which has an acceptance rate of like 8% of non-English,
Yeah,
non-UK students.
yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. I don't know where that came from.
I have
She's
a
convinced
friend
she
that
wants to live in England.
Okay. I have a friend who her daughter wants to go to school in England too. And they this summer made a trip and visited. I think when you do like the UK, if I understand right, when you do the sort of UK app, the application for college. So like Texas has
Yep,
one for most Texas
yep,
schools
yep.
that you can apply to 5 different schools, is what.
That's right.
And so she,
Yeah,
yeah. And so
it's like a
they visited.
clearinghouse. Yeah,
Yes. So they
yeah,
visited several. They went on a trip and visited several, and she kind of narrowed it down to the one she thought she could get into and that she liked, and she's doing that as well.
yeah. We'll see. It's financially, it's not the tuition's not horrid, really,
Yeah, that's what
but
she
living
said too.
there
You'd
is
think it'd be
pretty
crazy,
expensive.
but it's not. Yeah, the living. Yeah, she said you would think
Yeah,
people think it's out of touch, but it's not really different than
no,
going to
it's
UT.
really
So
not. No,
mhm.
no. I mean, it's Oxford tuition itself is not horrible, but living in Oxford is very expensive.
Okay.
That's what's hard about it. So
Do they
anyway,
have room and board? Do they have she can live on college
they
campus?
yeah they've got yeah they yeah I mean they've got you can do whatever. You can
Okay.
live wherever you want. It's like that Cambridge, Oxford,
Mhm.
St. Andrews. Like she's looked at where was the other place?
There's Leeds and there's several.
Yeah, it's not I'll think of it later.
Yeah,
It'll hit me
that's
randomly.
exciting. That's neat.
So I have no idea where this comes from, but okay.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Anyone else joining have any questions? That's kind of why I wanted to jump on early.
That's a cute picture of the dog.
Yeah, Kristen's got a dog picture.
I put that on there because I'm in an addiction counseling class and we had to attend an AA meeting online. And,
Yeah.
supposed to be anonymous. I didn't know if I needed to have my face off of the picture or just my name. So I switched it to a dog and I forgot to switch it back.
I
It
like
is my
it.
dog.
You should leave it. Yeah. Yeah, just leave it. I would say just leave it. Hey, we got a cold front today. It's only going to be 99.
That's great.
So just, bundle up. Bundle up.
We were actually in London this summer right before the heat wave, so we were lucky.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We've
Although the
only,
heat
I've
wave
only,
is Texas.
yeah, I've only flown through there. We have never been, but we're going to go. We're trying to go in the next couple of years, but yeah, it was really hot there. Like
Yeah,
for them, I
yeah,
think that
for
that
sure.
was like the highest heat they'd had in like 100 years or something. It's some
Mm.
crazy number. And they don't have AC a lot of, don't have a lot of.
Right, right. The place we stayed did have AC, but yeah, lots of places don't.
Yeah. I can't imagine living here. Like I talked to my dad and he's like, yeah, we didn't have air conditioning growing
Yeah.
up. And I mean, I couldn't imagine. My grandmother, she was young. They ended up in West Texas. They were migrant farmers for a long time. She was like little. This was in like 1925 or something. And just, no one had AC or anything. And you just,
Hmm.
I mean, I can imagine now. Like it's 74 in my house right now, or 373, and it's like I need to turn the fan on, Okay. I'm gonna let a few other folks join, and if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to jump in. Susan had brought up a question that she had just about the papers, like the reflection papers, um, and doing the mock sessions, and she was asking more specifically about if there were more specifics on the scoring of the Hearth Hope Index. And kind of what I was saying was that that particular assessment's one super easy to give and score and talk about, which was kind of the point. There are other assessments for Hope. For example, Hope is a construct that, like in the addiction world, they're using a lot more now, and so you can find more assessments in the areas of Hope. The other one, we're not going to talk about this one, but in the area of like career counseling, and not just with students, but like adults even. There's some really good values based assessments that are really good now that you can use with people. And like when if you take the career counseling and theories class, you'll talk about that in that class. But those constructs of hope and like values are, I'm going to say, newer in the last decade or so in terms of actually looking at them and helping people generate those and using those as kind of coping strategies almost. The values one in particular is good if you have people that say they want to change careers or jobs. Like a lot of people that come to Amberton are changing careers, let's say. And maybe they had worked in a profession for a long time that they made money, but maybe value wise didn't fit kind of what they believed or what they wanted. And so a lot of folks come into the counseling world because it's more along the line of their values that they have or their beliefs that they have, and a lot of times at those core beliefs. So a good values assessment can kind of dig through a lot of things and kind of help you think through that and look at those things. And that's pretty new, I would say. Like I can't even remember when I was in my master's program or my PhD program talking about values that much. Now in school counseling, I would think that you would talk about it a little bit more, especially if you ended up in the like in a university system where you were doing some kind of career counseling or anything like that. You'd probably talk about it more. Just letting a few people in here. Okay. So before we get going, anybody on have any other questions about anything?
Anything including like practicum kind of stuff or specific to the class?
Anything.
Okay, well then I have a question about practicum stuff, if I could ask.
Yeah, go for it.
The first is do like an MFT practicum, does that need an MFT supervisor?
So when you do your practicum, you technically are doing it through the school. So it's different than when you're getting your license. When you get your
Okay.
license, you would need a supervisor specific to whatever license you're getting. When you're like an LPC, like if you go through the LPC program, you just find a site. Same thing with the MFT program. You're finding a site, and there will be a supervisor there, but they're not like necessarily supervising a licensure process.
Gotcha. Okay.
They're just supervising the practicum. And so when you as you go through it, you're actually practicing on like even the insurance of like Amberton's liability program. Ultimately, your professor is kind of like the head over that, and then your site supervisor, you'll have a site supervisor at that point, which is different than your licensure supervisor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. That's helpful. Thank you.
And in pre-practicum, when you get
Yeah.
to pre-practicum, you'll learn about all of this. Like you'll get deluged with you'll get so much information that by the time you get to me in practicum 2, I'm going back over some of it because it's just like a fire hose of information at the beginning. Because you're coming out of academics, right? Into this, you're in the between world of like practicing and academics, because you still have a big paper that you do in pre-prac. It's kind of like a cornerstone piece of your program.
Okay.
But you'll also start seeing people. Prac 1 is like all seeing clients. Prac 2, all seeing clients. So you can finish your 300 hours. So you'll learn about all this stuff in pre-prac. You'll get tons of information.
Okay. And can pre-prac be taken? Because what I'm running into is the next semester, not all of the classes I need, because I'm almost finished with academics. So all the classes I need aren't all being offered. Can I take pre-prac prior to the semester before I start practicum? It's got to be sequential.
No, you have to finish. No, you have to finish all of your coursework first before you take pre-prac. You can only take pre-prac by itself, practicum 1 by itself, and practicum 2 by itself.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yeah. What are you missing?
I am ethics, which I already registered for, but I'm missing adult, geriatric, and child adolescent psychopathologies.
You have to take both or one of those?
I have to take both of those. Okay. But if I could take one of them next semester alongside counseling ethics, then, you know.
Has the summer classes been released? I mean, the fall classes are they released?
Yeah, registration started, I think, on the 1st
of August.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And neither one of those are offered, those two?
I didn't see them. I didn't see either one of those, no.
I know the adult geriatric. Sorry, I know adult geriatric is offered in the winter. I looked at that on the schedule. It's only offered in the winter online.
That's helpful. Thank you, sir.
Man, I can tell y'all I can tell you what's offered. If y'all want to bear with me just a second.
Thank you.
The winter, is that what we're talking about? We know what's happening in the winter?
Fall.
Oh yeah.
Fall. Okay. I'm talking about fall.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget what I'm teaching it. I probably shouldn't say that because now I'm recorded saying it too. So
did you say child adolescent psychopathology was one of them?
I did, because there's counseling children and adolescents, that's 6388, but there's also child adolescent psychopathology, and that's 6798. The 6798 is the one I need. Oh,
so both of those. Yeah, both are offered. 67,
yeah.
96, and 98 are both offered. Both.
Oh, okay. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Potentially they're full.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
it's Dr. Armstrong, and it's online classes.
Yeah.
I didn't see either one of those yesterday. I wonder if they are full and then they didn't show up on the registration.
Look right now and see if they're there.
Ours is full.
Which one?
Psychopathology is full.
Okay.
Sometimes what they will do is you can request to get in the class, especially if you're close to finishing. They'll try to help you out as much as they can.
Okay.
And just from a standpoint of like a professor's standpoint, when we get to where we'll have like 40 students in a class, like an online class is a lot. Like I don't know if y'all have noticed, but I've been really late grading things because just have a lot of students. And so that's one of the downsides of having a lot. The upside is for you guys. It's like, hey, if we can have, 45 people in a class, it's awesome. You can jump in and grab the class and take it, and you're going to still get the same information, the same level of class. But as it gets into that 35 and 40 student range, is kind of where they start looking at closing it down. It's a lot different if it's in person too. But I think most of those classes, I think those two classes right now are offered online. I think he does do them in person maybe once or twice a year, I think.
Okay, I'll look through. Thank you all for working me through this.
Any other questions?
Do we have, on top of pre-practicum, are there just 2 levels of practicum or are there 3?
So it depends on your program. If you're doing LPC, you do 2 practicums. If you do LMFT, then you're doing 3 practicums.
Gotcha.
And they're all separate.
Gotcha. I saw them all 3 on the schedule and I was like, I thought we only had 2, but I'm LPC.
And just to confuse you more, there's also extended practicum if you want to do that after you're finished with practicum 2 with the LPC. Like, say, for example, some students will, even though you graduated technically, will do the extended practicum to keep seeing their clients while they study and take the exam and wait for their associate license to come. Some people will do that. Like I've got 3 this semester doing that. Not everyone does that. You don't have to. Some people are like, I'm taking a break, I'll just wait. And that's fine too. You can take a break, because they're getting the license process. It's been a lot quicker recently, which is good. So, and I think the other thing that's been happening is I have noticed other people, or like the testing site has allowed people to take the exam before graduation, which is different. That hasn't happened before.
Cool. Thank you.
So anyway, that's probably way too much information. All right, any other questions? And Terry's put a really helpful little rotation guide in the chat. I think it can be really helpful for you guys to look at. That's online, like you can find that on the Amerton site. I think the Amerton website is changing, or it has changed. I think they're doing some tweaking of it to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So I don't know what all has happened yet, but I think they've been trying to change it up a bit. Okay. All right. What we're going to do today is I'm going to spend, we're going to do some group time a couple of different times. I'm going to talk about some ethics, like areas in ethics and then cultural diversity. We're going to talk about those at the beginning. And then I'm going to probably talk a little bit about behavioral assessments, because I don't think we got to that last time, if I'm not mistaken. I think we talked about marriage and family last time, with the mock interview that I did. And then I'm going to talk about some highlights like an intelligence and ability assessments. And I think I said this the very first class, I'm not going to get to every single chapter on the Zoom calls, but the material that you need is still there. And as a reminder for the final is comprehensive, so it's 100 questions. So there's 20 extra questions added in. There's some from the midterm. There's a few, not very many, but a few sprinkled in from the midterm. But the majority of the final is over the back part of the textbook for the most part. I did give everybody 2 points on the midterm because I didn't like a couple of the questions that was asked about measuring unsystemic error or systemic error. I didn't like them. And so I threw those out. So I gave everybody 2 points. And those grades should be up now. Your mock sessions, there's 2 reflection papers as a reminder. The first reflection is just over the intake session that you did with your partner. And the second reflection is just over you give reporting back and giving results of the assessments that they took. And so those are 1 to 2 pages each. If they're a little bit more, that's okay. But you can put them all on the same document and upload them. And you can turn those in anytime, but they're due. I think they're due on the 13th or 14th. I can't remember. Because the next big thing is the exam. And so the exam will open it'll be just like the midterm in terms of like time. It'll open on next Friday and then run all the way through the following Wednesday. And by the time we get to the 18th, which is technically the end of the semester or the quarter, by the time we get to the 18th, you should all know your grades, like all your grades, because everything should be recorded by then. Because I'll start working on some of I've got a few reflection papers turned in. I'll start working on some of those. That's all for like housekeeping stuff, administrative stuff. I did have, make sure I'm recording. Yes, I did have a couple of issues with Moodle, messages from Moodle bouncing back to me. So I've been trying to double back because I know some people have sent me some emails or messages through Moodle. And then I found some of them bounced back. So I'm not sure why. So I tried to resend them. So if you sent me a message, and this must have been happening like 3 or 4 weeks ago or maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure, but I try to get back to people fairly quickly, but I had some messages bouncing back. Has anyone else had any messages, like not just to me, but any class bounce back at all? I'm just curious. Or is it just me? Okay. All right. I'm not sure what was going on with that, but every once in a while I get these messages that bounce back. So if you didn't hear from me, I've been trying to kind of go back and answer some of the questions again for you. Okay. All right, let me hide a couple of things, get some stuff out of the way so we can get started here. For those of you that, and I sent this in the message, for those of you that were having trouble connecting with your partner, because I know some people were just because of time. What I had suggested is you can either find another classmate or you can use a family or a family member or a friend to do the sessions with. That would be my suggestion, and I would suggest doing that. If you haven't connected by now, I've tried to help a few people connect with each other, and some people have been able to. Some people, I think, schedule-wise, it's been hard. There's been some barriers to connecting. So my suggestion would be, at this point, I would just try to find someone to do those sessions with. I had a couple of people ask me questions about like time, because I think for the intake interview, I said 30, 45 minutes, something like that. I would really try to stick to that time frame, because that's really more along the lines of what an actual session would be. I think some people probably have gone over 45 minutes. Probably that happens fairly easily. However, for the when you're reporting back the results of the Hope Hearth Index, you wouldn't necessarily go 30 or 45 minutes. Maybe it would be more like 15 or 20, and that would be okay. So you can do that, because that would only be a part of a session that you would do. Now those are just suggestions for you. The big part is I want you to record yourself, and I want you to watch it after you're done. And then you're writing that reflection to me just on I think I gave you 4 or 5 questions to kind of look at and to use. So if you haven't connected with your partner, I would definitely, you need to be meeting with someone pretty quick, because it's due next week. So You can do it with a family friend, you can do it with a friend, you can do it with someone else in the class. It's really kind of up to you to do that, okay? All right. Now, let me jump into some of the things we're going to talk about today. And specifically, I want to talk about ethics and laws first. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for you too. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. Just like other classes, this class really dips its toes into several other classes that you're going to take. Like ethics is one of those. You're going to take a full class on ethics. You're going to take a full class on cultural, working with diverse populations. You're going to, and actually we talk about that in every class that we teach. And so one of the things about thinking about assessments in ethical ways, that's very important, is that we have two things to think about. The first is ethics are like principles, like every field has principles that address proper conduct as a therapist or as a counselor, right? So each, like the LPC board and the LMFT board and the board of psychologists and social workers all have ethics or principles that address proper conduct between you and your client, or the proper way to conduct your practice. And so that's different than a law, which a law is like a body of rules that could be like a state or a federal type law that would supersede some things in terms of how you work with people. And so, like, for example, I just got this email this morning. There is a call for public comment on a couple of rule changes. And really all they're doing is changing a couple of preamble, some language in the preamble, and for both LPCs and LMFTs. And so basically that would address like ethical type things. And one of them was on, I think, telehealth, having some more specific language around telehealth. So there's some ethical language or ethical principles that we have to follow as counselors around the area of telehealth, for example. The same is true when it comes to following those principles when it comes to assessments. So as when we think about practicing in a competent manner, we have to think about it ethically as well. It's like, for example, when you meet with clients, one of the very first things that you would look for from them, whether you give them actual paper, paper intake forms or do it electronically, you need to make sure that, for example, they've signed the informed consent. If there's not an informed consent signed, then we can't actually see them for any part of a session until they sign that. So that's like, there's things like that you'll have to kind of think through and know about. What are the ethical or state laws, federal laws regarding a client's health information, which we'll talk about here in a second. What about how you score and interpret assessments or give feedback? What about how you actually pick out the assessments? And so some of those things we're going to talk about today, because there's some ethical areas that we have to maintain. We just have to be aware of, and we have to maintain good, positive practices. Okay, clients have rights and counselors have rights. So some of those rights revolve around, in terms of assessments, revolve around the type of assessment we give, how we give it, how we score it, and then how we give the results. And so obviously clients have the right to be assessed with current professional standards. And that all revolves around like how you give the assessment, what type of assessment it is. In other words, like, it's not, it would not be good practice to find a Facebook assessment to give your client. That would obviously not be a good practice kind of thing. Clients have a right to know the basic information about the assessment. Clients have the right to understand how the results are disseminated. Do you just give these results out? How does that work? In other words, that goes back to how things are kept private. Informed consent is also important for this actual assessments as well. And this comes into play when we start talking about working with minors. So you kind of like how we work with minors and then how we work with adults. If you're working with minors, obviously you have to get parental consent before you do any kind of assessing. And minors in the state of Texas is technically 17 and under. By the time someone turns 18, technically they can give their own consent, which if you do this long enough, you'll realize that some parents don't see it that way. They might think consent for their minor stops at age 30, which is not appropriate, which we're going to talk about that here in a second as well. And so in terms of like clients' responsibilities, like being prepared to take the assessment or the test and follow the directions of the administrator, which you give them directions. Sometimes it's very plain on the actual assessment what the directions are. Sometimes it's a little like you have to give a little bit more feedback and more direction. And then obviously you want them to be as honest as they can. And some assessments are fairly easy to do that because they'll say, like, in the past 2 weeks, have any of these things happened? Or in the past week, think about this, all these questions in the past week or in the past month. If you get more into some more diverse assessment processes, you might find assessments that might ask like in the past 12 months, blah blah blah, whatever that is. And it kind of just depends on what you're assessing as well. Let me jump over. Yeah, let me jump to this one, because this is where we as the counselors come in. We have the responsibility for scoring correctly and interpreting, even if it's done by a computer, and being aware of our own competence in whatever this area is. For example, if I was working with someone that, and I've done this before, I've had clients that when we started the process didn't say anything about an eating disorder or self-harm. But as we got further along, it started to come out. And so I began to think that this person probably needs a higher level of care than I can give, like maybe even a facility. And so I know how to help people to a certain extent, but I know my limits in terms of like, I can't give someone a higher level of care just meeting with them once a week. Sometimes people need to be in a facility every day where people are there monitoring them and watching them, that kind of thing. And so you have to kind of think through those kinds of things. Just the same as I have colleagues like this that love working with individuals, love working with adults. They don't really want to work with children, don't really want to work with adolescents. And so they understand the assessment process of assessing a child, but that's not really inside of their competency. So good practice is for them to know that, right? Know your limits, and then also know people that you can refer to, which I've got a really good referral list of folks in those areas that I'm just not as competent in. It doesn't mean you don't know anything about it. It just means you might not be as competent. And so the other piece is, and this could happen even on the Hope Hearth Index. Like, for example, there's a couple of questions there you have to reverse score. Well, if you didn't know that while you give the assessment, that's going to invalidate the assessment, right? So you have to kind of pay attention to how the assessment's given and how it's scored. And that also reflects on how you interpret things. Okay. Some of these things I'm going to kind of skip through because there was a couple of things that were very important. Not that one. Okay, FERPA. Yeah, I want to look at these two. Especially in the school counseling world, these will be pretty big. Like obviously parental consent is needed before you evaluate a child. Most of the time, parents are bringing kids to people for evaluation. But when we start talking about any kind of disability, and I'll just use ADHD as an example. When you start talking about individualized education plans or IEPs, those are things that you want to collaborate with the parents on. For example, I've got Rachel, who I've worked with for a long time. Rachel's actually kind of, she would hate me say this, but she kind of specializes in going with parents and helping them through the 504 process, the IEP process, because she works with that age group, and she's really good at helping parents kind of think through that. But also she's really good at being a bridge between the parents and the schools, because it shouldn't be like an adversary. Like you're not against each other. You should be working together. As counselors, we can run into some school officials that don't really want us to be involved at times in certain parts of the process. For those of you that are going through the school counseling program, you're going to talk a lot more about IEP processes, 504s, those kinds of things from the standpoint of the school counselor. And even if you've been a teacher, you've probably been in some of those meetings. The goal of that is to make sure that the child is getting the things that they need. That's the goal. And so that all started, this idea of IEP programs, 504 plans is not super old. It hasn't been around that long. And so there's always some tweaks to it. And once they get a plan, obviously the goal is to maybe meet every year and make sure that plan is still good or still accurate or still helpful. The other big federal, now these are laws, like federal laws, the FERPA, you can get, as parents, can have access to children's educational records. Now, obviously, you should know this going in. Every time you register, there should be some language somewhere about records. If you're a student over 18, you can get access to your own educational records, which is kind of important. You don't ever have, as a child, as a kid, you don't ever have to submit to any kind of psychological examination or testing without parental permission, which is very important too. Because, in which you would think that would be common knowledge, but sometimes it's not. So these are just also things to remember, because sometimes you're going to work with families, and especially if you decide you're going to maybe work with elementary kids and end up working with those families, it's good for you to kind of know what some of these rights are too, so you can help advocate for the parents and kind of work with them. And I'm not in the schools that I've worked with in the past. I've worked with a few different schools. They've always been super accommodating, very helpful. I've never worked with a school where it's been like, what's going on with them? Why are they so secretive? Or why do they not do this? Or why do they not want to do these things? I've only worked with school systems that have been super accommodating and helpful. So I'm not saying that it's always that way, but for the most part it is. When we talk about HIPAA, HIPAA is kind of like, how do we store, how do we keep, how do we make public or not any kind of medical information, any kind of personal health information, PHI. You have to establish from the beginning HIPAA compliant practices. And then Texas has kind of gone almost a step farther with House Bill 300, and they've actually made some tweaks to it now in terms of even how you store your information. Like, for example, if you store it on the cloud, it has to be, a certain type of security level. If you store it in your home or in your office, like I've got files right here in my office, and I've got 2 sets of secure lock systems per HIPAA compliance on my file systems to have there. So those are things you have to kind of pay attention to. And there's also rules about how long you would keep clients' information. There's some kind of tweaks to the rules that have happened over the years, but you look at it from the standpoint of adult clients, you keep for X amount of time. And if you have clients that are minors that you worked with, you keep them for however long. Like if they're 15, you add 3 years, and then that 5 or 6 years at the end of it. So you might keep those files for 10 years potentially if they're minors. And again, all of these things you're going to talk more specifically about in ethics class, but these are the things to just kind of know. I'm going to get back to that one in a second. I want to, let me stop sharing for a second. Okay, any questions about that? Most of that's fairly straightforward, hopefully. Are you guys having trouble hearing me? Sounds like some people are, some people aren't. Okay. All right, I'm gonna do a switch here of my mic and see if that helps. All right, everybody hear me, hopefully?
Yes, I think it was just my machine.
Okay. That's all good. It's all good. So funny story, about 2 years ago, no, it was last summer. I was teaching a class and my audio. I'm sorry guys. I am really kind of like spinning in my head this morning. So I feel like my words are like really crazy. I was teaching a class and my audio stopped working for like 2 or 3 minutes or something like that, but no one said anything. And I was just talking, going through stuff. And then we took like a little mini break and someone popped on and they were like, hey, by the way, your audio is not working and hasn't been working. I was like, well, yeah, should have told me. All right. Okie dokie. Any questions about these things? This is fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of like, although ethics can be grayish, you kind of live in the gray when you talk about ethics, but in terms of what our role is in assessments. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, I want to talk about one of the things that I want to do. I want to talk about cultural competence, because this will be very important for us moving forward, not just in assessment, in the process of assessment, but it's important for us in the process of just working with people, because we're all going to work with people that are from diverse cultural settings, whether it's gender, sexual identity, age, developmental stage. If you're an English speaker, you might have folks that English is not their first language. So I think what's going to also happen in the coming probably 10 or 15 years is I would not be surprised if we have more international type work that happens too. So you'll have just thinking through things in terms of like being culturally competent will be very important. And so I want to talk about this kind of overarching idea of cultural competence, and then we're going to talk about it related back into the assessment world. So one of the things that I always like to start with is
is kind of like, hey, when we talk about cultural competence, what are we talking about, right? So what does that even look like? And so just to be as brief, but also as clear as possible, cultural competence means that you know that you don't know everything, right? So I know, for example, that in this class right now, culturally speaking, which culture is big, right? So culture covers lots of different areas. Culturally speaking, there's no way in the world that I know maybe even a fifth of your cultural experience at all. But I know that I can ask you more questions about it and become curious about it. I can know that I don't know everything. Where we get into trouble as clinicians is when we go into a situation thinking that we already know about this client culturally. And again, culture is broad. We could be talking about ethnicity. We could be talking about gender. We could be talking about socioeconomic status. We could be talking about age. There's things like family history, even, or kind of even the area of the country or area of the world you've grown up in. I've worked with a few couples from India, and one of the first things I learned in terms of like being culturally competent is that India is such a large country, and there's different parts of India that are not like other parts in terms of like language, culture, practices, things like that. And so when you start working with folks, which all of us do, that are of a different culture than you, more different, like I said, whether it's ethnicity or it's gender, you have to start from the standpoint of knowing that you don't know everything. So in general, that's what cultural competence looks like for the most part. Now there's other aspects of it, but in general, that's what we're talking about. And so one of the things I want to do for we'll do this for like 7 or 8 minutes. I'm going to put you into groups, and all I'm going to ask you to do is talk about a couple of different things. The first one is, why is it important, or what makes it important to be culturally competent, right? As clinicians, like what's important about being culturally competent. And the second question would be, and this is more of what we'll kind of talk about too when we come back. How do you become culturally competent? So what's important about being culturally competent? And how would you actually become more culturally competent? Okay. I'm going to put you guys in a group. We're going to do. All right. You should see it there on your screen, and just jump in and, like I said, 7 or 8 minutes. All right. What did we talk about?
Our group talked a little bit about how the client is the expert on their own life. So it's important to know what you don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about how it's okay for you to ask questions, especially if you don't understand something culturally.
Yeah. Yep. Good.
We talked about the importance of not making assumptions and really just empathetically listening.
Yeah. Good. Good.
We also talked about being able to change like your perception as you're accumulating information. So if you were thinking that it was going to be a certain type of way, and then you get new information, that you are able to shift your thinking to absorb that new information and move forward from there.
Good. Yeah, that's good. I'm a big fan of flexibility. Big fan of that. And as you age, you have to work harder at it. Like developmentally, that's actually something that happens. We have
Dr.
harder time
Bedard?
as we get older. Yeah.
Could you move the microphone a little closer to your mouth or something? You got a little quieter and it's harder to hear.
Yeah. Is that better?
That is better. Thank you.
Okay. I was saying I like flexibility, and as we get older, we have to work at it harder. Especially in gray areas. Yeah, anything else?
Susan Rice was very transparent, and if it's okay, I would like for her to share what she shared in our class, in our little group.
Okay.
I didn't have much to say, but I heard a lot.
Okay. Thank you. I'll share it. Thank you. I told Trissa I really appreciated the way that she heard it. Her feedback really, I appreciated it. But I was just sharing that as we discussed in our group, like in a tiny smidgen of a way of what a lot of people have experienced. I'm really kind of going to sort of out myself to the group a bit here, but that's okay. But I am experiencing recently with the political divide in our country, and specifically being a, white Christian woman in Texas, I've experienced a bit of, I think, the other side of cultural, not discrimination, that's too big of a word, but people making assumptions about my culture because I am that white woman who's a conservative Christian living in Texas. And that isn't really necessarily, they assume I think and believe certain things that aren't really what I assume and believe about like political issues and certain issues in our country right now. And so that's been kind of a really interesting and I think probably helpful lesson for me on, like I said, on the other side of this, and working with people who, like Teresa said, the majority of people feel when they come to America. I've never experienced that really, right? Because I am very privileged. I haven't had discrimination really. This has been the only time for me that I've ever realized, wow, people are really making assumptions about me that aren't true. And like she was saying, and I feel limited and kind of nervous to even share and speak about, because I don't want the criticism or the attacks that come from not, so it's been an interesting, probably growth experience for me.
I appreciate you sharing that. I don't think you're the only person that feels that way either. So I think what you're bringing up is interesting. For example, the fact that we're on this class right now means we have privilege that around 20-something% of the country doesn't have. And it's up like 60% of the world doesn't have internet. So when I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate it because now, we're not going to have a political discussion. We're going to talk about power, because that's what is more important to discuss when it comes to like how we work with people, like power or perceived power. That part is very important, and that's part of culture. That's it's part of how we see people and how we're seen by people. I'm a white man, so if in a power structure, then I'm here, right? Now we can start going down the list of, as we go through gender, as we go through ethnicity, as we go through age, right? We're going to start Does that make sense? Like we need to be mindful of power and how power works and how it works inside of different cultures. Now, if we talk about, if we were talking about it from a, like if I work with any of you, right, then I have to be mindful of where I sit, not necessarily just to you, but to me too. Like I have to be mindful of that. And so now I'm going to be transparent if you guys don't mind. When we're mindful of our where we sit in that hierarchy of power, when we become mindful, it can either be really helpful to us or really screw us up. If we're not used to thinking that way, then sometimes we can get defensive. So I have been working and have worked in the past 5 or 6 years with a lot of men that are very defensive, just in general, and angry, just in general, not about, I mean, there's things going on and there's things that they're dealing with. And I work with lots of people that are angry and defensive. Like if you work with couples, you work with anger and defensiveness all the time. That's just kind of where they live, and that's why they come to you. But when we start talking about when our power gets pushed on, and not just politically, just culturally, then we start getting into these worlds of defensiveness and anger and fear, really. And so it's important for us to know where we sit when it comes to like, okay, am I, as I'm working with people and I feel myself get defensive, let's say, or whatever, frustrated, whatever that is, right? Because Susan, you brought up three things that could potentially trigger lots of people: Christian, white, Texas. There's other things too, but those are big ones. Big ones. Because I work with people in Arizona and I'm about to start working with people in California, and they don't see us like we might want us to be seen, right? So we have to be mindful of that. Does that make sense? Like we have to be mindful of ourselves and where we sit and what's going on, which is why we're not the expert. Like I think someone pointed out in your group, like your client is the expert of them. They are the expert of their life. I say that to clients out loud, and sometimes they're like, what are you talking about? It doesn't mean I don't know anything. It doesn't mean you don't know anything. You're going through training, you're learning things, you're learning how to work with people, you're learning how to help people. So, and you're going to learn about different areas in different ethnicities. You're going to have some understanding of all those things. At the same time, I don't know what Susan's life is like because I'm not Susan. I have to ask her, or David, or Sarah, or Teresa, or anyone, Rosa, everybody. Like we have to have a conversation with them, right? So we have to know that, and this is what I do. You might not do it this way, but this is what I do because I find this to be the most effective. I take what's called a one-down approach to people. And I actually do this in all of my life now, not just like in my therapy life. I take a one-down approach, right? So for those of you that are certain age, you know who Columbo is. So Columbo is like the master of the one-down approach. The curiosity of, tell me more about that. I don't know if I understand exactly. Not in a patronizing way. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes you have to specifically say that to clients because they've been used to people patronizing them when you ask them questions that they think, are they really just asking me this, or are they just trying to be, kind of holier than thou? And I'm legitimately asking. I want to know legitimately, like, talk to me about this, right? So one down approach, that one down role approach, we actually have research now to back up that approach. What researchers are finding is that if we pose as an expert, even though we might be an expert in a field, that might be actually true. I've got a lot of knowledge and experience working with couples, a lot. And I feel very comfortable in almost any kind of situation. But if I pose as an expert, especially when we get into the areas of culture and diversity, if I pose as an expert, then what I do is I cause harm to the potential relationship that I might have with my client. I begin to harm the relationship. If I don't do that, if I say, let me understand what's happening, or try to take that approach, what I'm actually doing is simultaneously hearing them and building rapport. Right. Now we're talking clinically, right? Is it a bad idea that we do this in our personal life? Probably not, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about clinically speaking. It's like the opposite of Facebook and Twitter, and it's not really happening on social media per se. But what we're talking about is being able to be underneath and be okay with that. A one down approach underneath someone and being okay with that. And if I'm being honest, that can be hard for some people. Because we want to be experts, even though we're not. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay.
Professor, you asked the question how to become more competent.
Right.
Approach, that step down approach. We come to the table all just naturally with preconceived ideas and assumptive feelings, right? So how would you suggest, or how would you advise one to become more competent multiculturally? I mean, we read the books, we do the textbooks, we go through the steps, you see the formulas, you see how they're handling crisis, and you go to the different countries and then they have different neighborhoods. How does one really become competent in that way?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. What did you guys talk about when it comes to like how you do it? I'm just kind of curious to see what you guys said.
In our group or
anybody? Yeah, anybody.
Because David had some really good points.
I can share a little bit. Part of what I've come to understand is that initially I had a view that I thought was the view of the world. And so I applied that to everyone I saw. It wasn't until I started to live outside my box, and I've lived and worked in 7 different countries for about 13 years altogether, that I really started to understand that there were other ways of seeing the world and everybody else's experience was not the same. Once I understood that, then it became very interesting and important for me to be able to sit down and help me understand those views of the world. So I love talking with people. I have one friend who was Taiwanese American, and their family shifted from China to Taiwan at the time, shortly after World War II. So it was very interesting for me to talk with them, to get them to help me understand what it was like from both sides of that. And so for me, it becomes something that I really, truly love to explore. And I think in how my feeling about wanting to understand, I think shows in how I ask the questions. So I think it does help people open up to the fact that that's really what I want to know. Because I did not understand the world when I grew up in very white, rural Manitoba in Canada.
Yeah.
I really didn't.
Yeah. So now we're introducing this idea of like worldview, how we have a worldview, because everyone has one, and how it can be influenced, and how it's influenced maybe early on versus as you get older, how it can be influenced. Like in David's example, like, okay, I've traveled, I've lived in other places, and I've had other conversations with different folks about different things, right? So I saw the world one way. So in some ways, we're talking about expanding how we see the world, right? We don't just see it in one way, right? There's multiple ways to see the world. So that's good. Anybody else?
Okay, I share a little bit in our group. We talk about education and shared stories with the colleague. For example, if I had like a clan, we thought we assume in certain way, but it's turned out in another way. So if we have a chance to communicate with the other colleague or by education, I lived in international houses for a while, so I know if we have a chances to expose international places, know about other culture, and help us to know the real stuff, right? And not theoretically. And also, yeah, that's the main thing we talk about. And also set up a certain boundary because we will never know. We don't know what we don't know. So we just maybe set a certain boundary. We talk about like a job or career. We just focus on unless the other party want to disclose something. Yeah, but keep it safe. That's something we share.
I think that's really good because we say if we come into it thinking we already know something, or there's no more we can learn, that's really a problem, right? Even if we've worked with a certain, like you were saying, Jane, like even a certain culture of maybe, or a certain cultural perspective you've worked with for a long time, it doesn't mean you know everything about that cultural perspective. So that's really good. And your picture on your Zoom is really funny too, by the way.
That's my real situation. That's why I cannot open camera.
I like it. I like it. I don't have to worry about that. Anyone else?
I can share, well, in my group, I share that, I work in a Title I school and I'm a teacher there. And I work specifically with Spanish speakers because I'm bilingual Spanish. But this year we got like families from Afghanistan and they didn't speak English. Nobody speak their language. So it's okay just to research and then find resources are out and then ask for help too. So the schools need to go and find someone who speaks their language so they connect because they were crying all day and they couldn't speak with the parents. And it was like the first week was completely madness because they were we got around 50 kids. But then it's okay to know that we don't know. As you said, it's just so important just to be humbled about it. So, and then little by little, they start getting groups with them and work with them, and then by ages. And then, it was just, that's the first time I realized how important this is about culture. Just being touched with their own self, because they just came, they were completely transitioning from one country to the other, and there's the background because they saw things that we cannot even imagine because they started just sharing their stories. It was just, this is a 5-year-old who saw this happening. It was just eye-opepening. So yeah. And right now we're getting so many more families that are going through that from all around the world. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. It just was.
No, that's good. And okay, like language barriers in and of themselves are so difficult.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And we have to be humble enough. I love what you said. We have to be humble enough to go, hey, I need help here.
I don't know. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't know. Once one of those students, little kids, they saw someone shot another one and die in front of their eyes. So it's just, it was something that you can hear it and then you cry. Just listening to it.
Yeah.
Yes, and then you need to find help too for yourself, just to heal that part.
I was just literally about to say that we need to be finding help for ourselves. We have to, for things like that. That's very difficult. right? And depending on where you guys end up, like if you end up working in certain populations, you might hear stories like that. If you work in other populations, you'll hear different things, or you'll be a part of different things. I had to go and talk to a supervisor friend of mine recently about a session I had that I had never had a session like that in the 13 years I've been doing this. It was brand new for me, and it was like, for the first time ever, I've walked away from sessions sad, like you're saying, Rosa, like walking away sad from things and kind of hurt and like hurting for people. But I walked away from this session really, really mad. Like my wife was even like, "What's going on?" Because I'm at home. I walk out, right? Walk outside, because I went outside and sat out in the sun. It's like 105, and I just sat out there, which probably didn't help my anger at all. But I called my friend. And I was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." We need to find ways that we can have outlets, and especially in areas of cultural competence. If we're feeling stuck somewhere, it could be because we're stuck on something when it comes to someone's belief system, or or how someone grew up, and how someone grows up is vastly different too. So we have to be able open and humble enough to take information in and ask for advice, and again, know that we don't know everything. I've supervised students for a while. I've supervised associates for a while, and I'm just being super on, man, I'm feeling really transparent today. Susan's kind of inspired me here. The ones that are hard to supervise are the ones that know everything and won't take your help. It's the yeah, but. It's the, oh, I do that already. It's the, yeah, I tried those things already. Those don't work. And you're just like, well, okay, you know what? Have fun. We'll see. We'll talk to you later. That's how I feel. Like sometimes I'm like, well, okay. You're going to have a short-lived therapeutic life, right? So circling back to how we increase our competency, it's like we increase our competency for anything. We don't stop. We continue to work. We continue to grow, right? We'll reach a plateau probably. Everyone will reach some kind of like plateau as you learn and grow. But then you'll get hit with something. You're like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't see that coming. I didn't see a family from Afghanistan coming to my Title I school where it's mainly Spanish speakers, and all of a sudden they might be speaking Farsi. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't see that coming, right? So that goes back to what I was saying earlier about flexibility. And for those of you that are jumping into the lifespan class next, you're going to hear a lot about this coming up. Cognitive flexibility is easier to do when you're younger and a lot harder as you get older, because we get set in our belief systems and we get set in our ways about things and things like that. I mean, it's just normal. That's a normal developmental process. But being cognitively flexible, it doesn't mean value flexible, right? Just cognitively flexible becomes more and more important, especially in the areas of competence. Because if we say, on one hand, we're trying to learn and grow and develop culturally in our cultural competence, which means we don't know everything, and we know we don't know everything. But on the other hand, we remain inflexible in our ability to think. That's a problem. Does that make sense? Like that's when we start, like, and I'm talking about for us individually, we start struggling. And I'll go back to something David said that I think is really true. When we have a certain viewpoint and then that viewpoint gets challenged is one thing, right? Like if any of you have a viewpoint and I challenge your viewpoint, we could have a discussion about it, and that's one thing. But when you have a viewpoint and it gets challenged because of an experience you have that challenges the viewpoint, that's totally different. Because then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. People have this viewpoint because of some of these experiences. I need to think about that too. not just like this isn't it goes from like being some kind of academic discussion to like this is real life. I think Jane said that a while ago, like culturally speaking. You know, people are living real life. We don't live in, you know, this class, right? All of us are going to leave today and have real life things happen. Different ones, you know? And for some people, that's going to be really difficult. Some stuff's going to be hard where to someone else, it might be like, whatever, I can handle that. Does that make sense? Like when we start talking about cultural competence, we have to remember that some people are also coming at this from totally different experiences than us. Totally different. So, okay.
I've experienced from time to time when I work with different groups of people that, especially younger people, they will say, that count, he was really good at before he went to school, before he got his master's or before he became a licensed practitioner or whatever. Now that's all he wants to talk about is when he qualified, what I have, what I am, what I do, versus before when he just came to them as a feeling person, an empathetic person, and I'm saying him in generically so. And I've seen education get in the way of, you know, it kind of clogs up that humility or that ability to see people because you can't get past your academic perspective. And, you know, of course, we take great pride in our education, but to be in this arena, that book, once you leave here, nobody really wants to see your books except maybe you, doctor. But no, my clients aren't interested in my books. That interview is not about me telling you where I got my degrees and what level of education I have. That interview, they already know that you would be there if you didn't have some form of qualification. That interview is about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it goes back to this phrase that I heard when I was back in church world. It's like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right? So when we come out of like I took a psychopathology class in my master's program, and our psych teacher told us, he said, this is what's going to happen. We're going to go through this whole, because at the time it was DSM-4, revised DSM-4, so DSM-5 hadn't come along. He said, we're going to go through the DSM-4, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to love it at first, and then you're going to start diagnosing yourself with every single thing you come in contact with. You're going to read that, and all of a sudden are bipolar disorder, or all of a sudden you have whatever, right? Because when we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we do have to keep things in perspective. And so I think that's why part of education should be application, not just information, right? We need information. We need to have the information coming in, but we need to be able to process it, synthesize it, and then apply it. Which, Teresa, to your point, it's awesome, man. I love it when people know stuff. That's great. And we all know people that know a lot of things. And they'll tell you they know a lot of things. That's great. How much can you apply? Because when it comes down to it, can you help someone? And I've been around people that maybe never opened a counseling book in their life, but are, man, powerful with people. Now, can they do certain things that maybe I can do? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean anything. You know, they just have a way of doing things with people. So how do we merge those worlds together? And education should never get in the way of our advancement, and it should never make us like, you know, we should always remain humble in what we do. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. So I think when we can, as we talk about competency, and especially cultural competency, you're going to talk about this at different levels in all the classes that you take at Emerson, just because it's important. America is extremely diverse in terms of like parts of compared to lots of parts of the world. I mean, America is pretty diverse. It's a pretty diverse society as a whole. It doesn't always feel that way sometimes, but it's pretty diverse. And this is what I was talking about earlier. I really think we're going to see clinicians having the ability to work with like people outside of our state, outside of our country. I really think that's going to happen. I really do. Mainly because technology technology can be used to help people in different parts of the world. Like I can be sitting here and I can work with people in somewhere else. So being culturally competent to me is going to be more and more important. It really is. And when we talk about assessments, as we're assessing, this is just part of that assessment process. It's just part of that information that we're gathering. Now, the book will do a good job of talking through a couple of things specifically in terms of like how an assessment is normed and the population it's normed on, and why those things are important, and how a lot of the better assessments have been re-normed after they were made the first time. Like if something was developed in the 50s or 60s, there's a high possibility that they didn't norm that on the population that we have now in America. So they have to re-norm that test, and they'll revise it to fit more of the diverse population we have now. And you'll want to look for things like that. And you can find information about that in pretty much any kind of really good assessments. Some of the assessments that come out now they've done a really good job of that. You can kind of see the populations that they norm those on. At the same time, we do want to be mindful of like language is a good example. If someone is let's say Spanish speaking, Rosa was talking about Spanish. If someone's Spanish speaking, but can speak English, but can't really read English, that's something you got to think about. You can find translations of assessments into multiple languages, but you have to make sure that they're valid and reliable in the translation, right? Because some languages, as you guys know, with English, like words in English and words in other languages don't always match. And that's important too. Concepts in America don't always match concepts in other countries either. So you have to think about things like that as well. Assessments that are really well designed and developed will take those things into consideration. But those are just some of the things to think about. And again, the book does a good job of kind of going through some of those things. I want to shift gears. Let me make sure I want to shift gears real quick. I don't want that one. This one. Nope. Pulling up every slide I want except the slide I want. I don't want that one. There we go. Okay. Okay, now we're going to shift gears. And we're going to talk about something. There's really two areas of assessment to me that are really like the hard areas. That's personality and intelligence. Because personality means lots of different things, and so does intelligence. So to unpack them is difficult. We're going to talk about intelligence specifically today. And so what I want to do is I'm going to put you back in groups, and I want you to talk about just a couple of really simple questions. The first one is, what is intelligence? Now, you could have already been reading ahead. This is in chapter 9. You could have been reading ahead, and you can use the book, what it says. That's cool. What is intelligence? And what would make it difficult to assess? Right? So what is it, and what would make it difficult to assess? And then when we come back, we'll talk about those things, and then I'm going to share a couple of things PowerPoint wise, and then I think we'll have enough time. I'm going to jump into some diagnoses type stuff too. Okay, so what is it? What would make it hard to assess? And go.
you.
Sounds like we cut some people off. Right. So when we think about assessing intelligence, personality probably a lot more difficult, probably. Intelligence, there's some basic concepts in intelligence that we'll need to understand for sure. And there's this psychometric approach, which is kind of like, you know, intelligence is based on mental factors. Spearman's was one of the first kind of models. This is a long time back in the 20s. So like general ability, and then looking at other specific factors. And then we fast forward to 1988, where we talk about 180 intellectual factors. This is what makes some of these things hard to assess, because we can't always agree on what we're assessing when it comes to intelligence or personality. That's why at the very beginning, the first class, we kind of talked about like in the social sciences, we're sometimes assessing something that doesn't always have like clear boundaries or clearly defined areas. But we can assess things like how people think, how they think in certain situations, things like that. We can have an assessment for that. Some of these that are listed here in the book too, in terms of like looking at, and these are still assessed today: verbal comprehension, word fluency, number facility, speed, memory, how we recall things, spatial testing. That's all general ability. Those are all part of intelligence testing. This idea of fluid ability and crystallized ability is actually very important. And developmentally speaking, it's very important in terms of assessment. And so this Cattle-Horn-Carroll model is definitely one of the more influential theories about assessing intelligence. So fluid abilities are biological. They're determined by your genetics most of the time. And they're mainly culture free because they're genetically influenced. So like your memory span and spatial thinking, those tests that measure those things. But when we start talking about crystallized intelligence, then or abilities, we're talking about like acquired skills, or like acquired knowledge, or knowledge influenced by culture, either socially, educationally, socioeconomic. So like verbal comprehension, social relations. This would also like your emotional intelligence actually would be influenced by your crystallized abilities. And those crystallized abilities kind of happen over time too, because they're skills that you're learning and developing over time. For example, like if we talk about reading, like as kids learn to read and comprehend, we know for a fact that regardless of like socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, reading to kids when they're young helps them. That helps them. The more words they hear, the better. Then we shift that to the more words they can say and the more words they can see and pronounce. Like that, just kind of those go together, right? So those are things that are important. Those are skills and abilities and pieces of intelligence that are crystallizing for them. We just know that. If we throw a cultural component into it, certain socioeconomic status areas might read less to their kids than other socioeconomic status areas. So if you read less to your kids, it doesn't mean your kid's dumb or anything. It just means they're getting read to less. So maybe there's a little delay there at some level. Does that make sense? Well, that's a cultural kind of component to think about, which only really influences their crystallized abilities or their skills that they're building. It doesn't necessarily do much to the fluid abilities because we kind of have those set to a certain extent. Now, the one thing that we definitely know is that a large part of our intelligence, kind of like personality, personality is a little different. We develop these areas of intelligence too over time. So kind of looking at crystallized abilities, that, you know, we might not be able to do certain things obviously at a certain age, but as we grow and develop and change and learn, we might be able to do certain things that we used to not be able to do. Or we like well, if anyone here wanted to pick up another language, learn another language, you could do it. It'd be hard. Some people pick it up fairly easily, some people not, but you could do it. It would be difficult, but you could do it as adults. Obviously, when you're children, it's a little easier. It's a little easier to pick it up. That's because certain things develop over time. It doesn't mean that you can't develop certain areas of your intelligence, but it does mean that there are going to be certain pieces that are fairly locked in. It's similar to personality in that way because, well, the old thought about personality was by the time you're like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, that's it. That's, you know, it doesn't change, and that's your personality. We don't believe that now because we've seen the brain actually, we've seen how elastic our brains are. We actually know that our brains can grow and change. Even into our 80s, we've seen that. So that tells us that not every single thing is always locked in. At the same time, our ability, whether it's intelligence, personality, learning a new skill, is more heavily influenced by what I call our want to button. If we don't want to do something, we won't do it. If we want to do something, we have a way better shot at doing it. For example, clinically speaking, and you'll see clients like this that will come in and they'll tell you they want to change, I want to work on my anxiety, or I want to work on my depression, or I want to work on how I think, or I want to talk about my childhood or whatever. Like there's all kinds of different things. And they say that up front, but underneath it, there's not like a lot of want to. I don't really want to do that. Maybe someone told me I needed to, or I got in one situation that I wish I could change. And then after that situation went away, I felt better and I don't need to change anything. If we don't want to do something, it's just difficult to do it. But if we want to do something, our brain's powerful enough to do it. We kind of help people. We can actually help people turn on the want to button too, but that's a kind of a different discussion. But when we think about intelligence, there are, kind of going back here, this fluid ability and these crystallized abilities. So those are two really big areas in intelligence that are really important.
Professor?
Yes.
So number 5 on the review, with regard to intelligence, most theorists agree that there is both. I got confused there. I got tripped up.
Okay. What's the question?
With regard to intelligence, most theorists agree that there is both blank plus blank. And I said one general ability factor, many lower level factors.
Yeah. Yeah, there's multiple factors. Yeah. General ability has been the common accepted form of intelligence for a long time. Look, there are general abilities that we have, and we can assess those general abilities. So I would say, yeah, the other, like other there are other factors. Yeah. Does that help, or does that make it more confusing?
My life of psychology is very confusing right now. I'm an ABA student as well.
Yeah, we like
They're starting to clash.
yeah. So when we talk about general ability, or this G, and then other specific factors, there's like this, like Guilford comes along and says, well, hey, there's 180 factors. You know, we know for a fact that there's general ability that we're going to assess for sure. That's like in school settings. A lot of the school setting assessment processes are about general ability at reading or comprehension or things like that, right? There's other also very specific factors, like if we want to look at a specific piece of someone's intelligence, like if we wanted to look at how, like a certain skill, you know, we could do that. So I think the question, if I'm not, I don't have the question in front of me, but my assumption would be that the question is kind of like asking you to like apply some stuff that you're reading. That's what it sounds like. Does that make sense? Or did I make it worse?
Thank you.
Okay. Ba, 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 ba. I want to jump to a couple of things. These particular intelligence scales are very popular still. All the Wechsler intelligence testing. The Wechsler is very popular. The Stanford Binet has been popular for a long time. And if you talk, like if I had Dr. Armstrong on here, he would talk specifically about a couple of these probably that he likes. If we had another psychologist, they'd talk specifically about ones they like. The general idea is that technically speaking, psychologists are the ones that will give these certain types of tests and then write reports about them. The reason why is because we need to know things about verbal comprehension and perception, reasoning, working memory, processing speed. So like Dr. Armstrong, for example, is he's more of a neuropsychologist. He's going to look at these more on the neurological level. And I've had lots of conversations with him about, like, for example, working memory. He did a lot of work with people that had traumatic brain injuries, and working memory is affected. Working memory is also affected when we talk about working with kids or adults that have ADHD. Your working memory is affected because it affects that part of the brain. So there's parts of the brain that we actually know more about that actually house verbal comprehension or house perceptual reasoning. So we can actually this is what's kind of cool to me about neurology. We can actually target some interventions towards parts of the brain that will then enhance these particular skills, which is kind of cool if you think about it. We can actually target areas to help people get better at them. And the reason why we can do that is because we now know a lot more about the brain and where some of these areas are kind of housed in the brain. I want to make sure that I'm this is what I kind of talked about, fluid abilities being genetic. Is intelligence hereditary? Kind of like personality. It's super controversial if it's hereditary. It's often really difficult to determine how much genetics contribute to intelligence. But we feel like it's probably like half and half, maybe. It's kind of like asking a question, is someone the way they are, do the things they do because of nature or nurture? It's the same discussion, same type of discussion. There are both genetic factors and environmental factors that affect intellectual development for sure, like how we develop intellectually. There are genetic factors and environmental factors. It seems, if we were to be specific about like IQ scoring, it seems like it's related to both areas. That's what it seems like. So it's fun. I mean, it's fun to debate, but in all honesty, like environmental factors, when it comes to intelligence, we talked about culture, school attendance, the quality of schooling, family environment, what type of environment students come home to, live in, are around. Other environmental factors, I mean, as you can imagine, if you grew up in a country that was at war, then you're going to have some fairly detrimental factors around you all the time, right? Versus if you grew up in a neighborhood that's pretty, quiet. And I mean, there's just going to be differences that you're going to have to work through. It doesn't mean and intelligence doesn't necessarily mean smart per se, like smart or not smart. There's just it's more nuanced than that. It does affect obviously it does affect like how smart you are, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. This one's interesting. If you guys want to go down, a big rabbit hole, start looking up the Flynn effect. So James Flynn first brought this up, that he started seeing that intelligence scoring has been steadily increasing over years, which is kind of interesting to look at. And so if you really want to go down a rabbit hole and can't sleep at night, just look up this stuff, because there's a lot of interesting theories about it. And it's actually true that intelligence, the scores themselves, have been increasing over decade by decade. That's actually happening. I think my kids are a lot more intelligent than I am about a lot of things, that's for sure. Okay. And I'm always going to run out of time. I did want to talk about one thing real quick before we get done. I want to talk about what a mental disorder is, because that's kind of important as we start to assess. Here's why this is important. I actually had this conversation with a family member of mine recently. There's a lot of mental health jargon that gets thrown around now in our world, which is, it's not necessarily bad. It used to not be that way. Things like this person, I hear this from clients, like, I have undiagnosed bipolar disorder, or that person's so bipolar, or if you talk to my daughter, like, everything's trauma. This is traumatic. Everyone's going through trauma. This is very traumatic for me, or, that kind of thing. We start throwing around mental health words that are associated with disorders. We need to be specific and be mindful of that when we work with our clients, because mental health disorder actually has some categories that are important. For something to be a disorder, it needs to be clinically significant, like a clinically significant distress or impairment, which is why when you give people an assessment, whether someone's being assessed for depression or ADHD or bipolar disorder or some type of learning disability, looking at someone on the autistic scale, they have to reach a score that's actually clinically significant, that's understood by the mental health world as clinically significant. It has to happen in more than one area of their life, the impairment. It can't just happen in one spot. It needs to happen in multiple places. For example, when you like a teenager or a child, let's say an elementary kid gets assessed for ADHD, they're going to give an assessment to the parents, the teachers, and then they're going to do an actual in-office assessment, because you have to have clinical significance in multiple places, not just one spot. And then there's these diagnostic criteria that we can compare things to. So those things are really important to remember as we think about mental disorders themselves. And I bring that up because there's just so many psychological phrases and terms and a lot of mental disorder words being used by a lot of people, and your clients will do that too. Okay. Okay. We're going to land the plane here. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about anything, either things we just talked about or about the class? Any questions about anything?
The name of the current DSM that we're using, the DSM
It's 5. I think there's a T. Is there a TR? It's 5. I feel like TR is either in development. Is it actually come out? Yeah. So text revision. So basically what that means is they spent the last 4, 5, 6 years debating all the what they just came out with, and they've decided to make some revisions inside of it. I haven't got the TR. I've got, yeah, look at that. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
David, is the other one just the DSM-5, the thinner one?
Yeah, this is the DSM-5.
Yeah. And that's the text revision. Yeah.
So you can see how much they've added.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's what they do.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
Now, yeah, and so with Dr. Armstrong's class will be that, I bet it's a TR. I bet you.
It is.
I don't have the TR yet. I need to get that one actually. How much was it? About $1,000?
I can't remember. I just grin and bear it and bought it.
Yeah.
My wife's a counselor too, so she had the DSM-5 again for the course.
Yeah.
So we needed it anyway.
So what I do, I'm a nerd. I'm a super nerd. There's tabs you can buy now to put in the different sections so you can flip to them quicker. That's what I do.
I've dog-eared all of them.
Yeah.
That's what I've done, is just dog-eared them. Yeah, you're right. I do need the tabs.
It's really helpful. If you really, do they have in the TR, is there at the beginning, is there like a, hey, here's some things that have changed section?
They do have an introduction use of the manual.
Okay.
Yeah, so the table of contents is a preface for the DSM-5 TR and one for the DSM-5. So they do explain the differences between the two.
Yeah.
They talk about the task force that did it too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So one of the big things, there's a couple of big things that came out of the 5. There was talk of getting away totally from personality disorders, and they decided not to do that. The first edition of the 5 was no personality disorders, and then everybody got really ticked off about that. There's a whole outcry in the mental health world, so they kept them. They did make some changes to some diagnosis of those, but they made some changes there. The other one that this was probably more personal for me, because I work with, I don't know, a fair amount of folks going through grief and loss. And so there's not like a disorder of grief and loss. So you kind of have to figure that out. But one of the factors of grief and loss is doesn't always sync up with what other disorders are. And so there's some talk that grief and loss was going to, or some type of disorder associated with grief and loss would be in the new version. So I'm kind of curious about that.
Can you talk a little bit more about disorders and diagnosis of them and how it relates to with the insurance, especially like on an intake session, you spend 30, 40 minutes talking to somebody, just getting, you know, the basics. And then, so what code that session? Just wait till you see them your sessions, or what if they never come back and that was a session?
Yeah.
I'm not really understanding how this works with insurance and ethics as far as that goes.
Yeah. That's a good question. So I'll give you guys just enough information to be dangerous with at this point. Okay, so insurance companies work off a medical model, which the medical model is you have to have a diagnosis. And right now, currently, there only one person, even if it's a family that you're working with, can have a diagnosis. Second, the diagnosis that you give has to be reimbursable for them to use insurance. For example, if I give a diagnosis that's more like a relational, like you can look in the DSM, there's a section of relational type diagnoses. They used to be called the F section. It's different now. None of those are reimbursable, right? So they also use what's called the ICD-10. That's the international coding system. They use the ICD-10. That's just used across the board. You guys wouldn't even know it. Y'all wouldn't know any difference because they made a big change back in about 10 years ago. The other part that they use is what's called a CPT code, which is a 6-digit code that you would put on the whatever you file that lets them know if it's an individual session or if it's a family session or if it's a family session without the identified patient present, or if it's a psychological evaluation or whatever it is, a group session. The CPT code tells the insurance company like, okay, this is what kind of session it was. The diagnosis code tells them what the actual diagnosis is, if there is one. So going back to what you're saying or asking, if you're working with a client, and I tell all my clients up front, hey, you have to meet criteria for a diagnosis to use insurance. That's the first thing. If you don't meet criteria, then you can't use the insurance because that's how it works, right? I mean, that's just how it works. Now, having said that, probably 96-7% of the people you're working with probably have some diagnosable disorder. That's super possible. And so the first thing is you have to meet diagnostic criteria, which you'll find in the DSM. You have to designate whatever the CPT code is. And then a little more advanced knowledge, you already, when you work with an insurance company and you become part of their panel of providers, you get reimbursed a certain rate no matter what anyway, which is a whole different conversation. So just think medical model. That's how insurance companies work. They don't work off anything else. That's it. They want to know what the diagnosis is, and they want to know who's in the room. That's all they want to know. That's it.
Dr. Vidar, did you say about 90% of the people we're working with could meet a diagnostic
At
code?
least that many. I mean, so I think our textbook, this textbook is from 2018, I think, or 17. I can't remember. I think it said 25% of the population had mental disorders. It's 35% now. It's between 35 and 40% now, especially after COVID, right? But out of that, only like a certain percentage of them actually seek help. So going back to one of the things Brian asked at the very beginning, when you do your intake session, that might not be enough to like diagnose something. You know what I mean? Like you're just talking to them. unless you give them a like a depression scale of some kind, or depression inventory, or an anxiety inventory, or something like that, that would give you, like, for example, if you give them Beck depression inventory, there are cutoff scores that would tell you if they are, first, if they have depression, and second, what level of depression. And in the DSM, you can look at the different levels as well. Like, it's a continuum basically. But that first session, you might not know that. You know, you might have to kind of figure that out. And I've worked with clients before where it 2 or 3 sessions in, you're like, I think this is what's happening. Like, this thing is happening. Let's figure this out, right? Like, you'll kind of go that direction. Now, some people come to you from a doctor, let's say, and the doctor referred them because they have depression or anxiety or ADHD or something. So you kind of have that information as well, and you can get that information from their doctor to use for your diagnosis as well. So there's ways to do it, but in terms of insurance, that's kind of what they want. Hopefully I didn't confuse everybody.
And is it often for your diagnosis to change after a couple sessions, or can you add different ones as you continue to see a client?
Yeah, I mean, you could have like a secondary diagnosis. Like, when you go in, and like I do everything electronically, there's like a section now that's like this long that you can put all these diagnoses in if you want. Like, they could have multiple, you know, like if any of you ever worked at a facility, like a mental health facility, you would get into all of this super hardcore. Like, some people might have like multiple diagnoses. Right. So like right now for ADHD, is not uncommon for someone to have ADHD and have anxiety as well, or have depression as well, or things like comorbid, like things that are dual diagnosis, things that happen simultaneously. That's not uncommon. And this stuff that I'm talking about now, these areas, you'll talk a lot about in the DSM class, or the advanced psychopathology class that you're taking.
Side note, chapter 12 of your final review. After 17, there's not a question, but there's selections.
Yeah, that's probably because I cut something off. If there's no question or there's no answers, then it's not in the final. I've been trying to edit the exams in this class and my other classes, and sometimes I'll cut stuff off. It's because I'm not patient. I get impatient.
And I missed the beginning. Did you guys discuss that handing in the project of our teamwork? That's just our viewpoint of ourselves, or is one paper for us and one paper of the person observed?
It's all you. It's all you. Everything's you.
Yeah, are you looking for sites, research, citation supporting?
Nope. It's just a reflection. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
In the HERT, are we giving theirs and ours?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The what do you call it? The HERT, it's HERT. How do you pronounce it?
The Hope Hearth. Mm-hmm.
Hope Hearth, yeah. Are we giving both sides, ours and theirs, our scores and theirs?
Mm-mm. Just yours. Both papers are self-reflections.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions about anything?
I can't remember. Is this our last class?
This is it. This is it. This is it. Your last chance.
Thank you for your instruction and your help.
Yeah. Did you guys like well, y'all don't really have anything to compare this to, but I'm assuming that most people liked doing the mock sessions versus writing a paper.
It's helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good exercise. I really learned a lot about both my partner and myself.
Okay. Man, I used to load this class up, y'all. Y'all are kind of lucky. I used to give so many things. I got ripped on one evaluation. Someone was like, "This is too much stuff." I'm like, "It's not my fault. You're taking 4 classes. That's not my fault."
This information, even though you may not include it, we still have to have it ready for the state.
Oh yeah. And you'll that the way that the study guides are just kind of the way I use the study guides is also more for your reading and comprehension kind of stuff. And so these this class is actually going to be in person in the fall. I'm going to teach it in Frisco on Saturdays in the fall. So it'll be actually a little bit different, but not much different. I basically do the same thing.
I like the questions in the study guide because it takes time to find the answers.
Yeah.
So you really have to read and reread and read. So I'm learning at the same time more.
That's why I stopped giving so much work, because the study guide, I made the study guides hard.
I know.
So, but you can use a study. Y'all used it on the exam, right?
I do. I mean, it's easy. Yes.
Yeah. I kind of think maybe a couple of people didn't, and I'm like, why would you not do that? I think I told everyone, right? You can use it. Use your book.
Yeah.
You can use your notes, whatever.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
study guide.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, the study guide is all right. It's
No, go ahead, Jane.
helpful, but the answer I find is different. When I do the exam, I put the answer I find it's not the same. It's not right.
Yeah. Do you remember what questions? Because I do know there were definitely like 2 questions specifically that were not good
My
questions.
case is more than 2.
Okay.
Well, sometimes I Google it. I couldn't find it in the book. So where else I can find it? And then I found it. Like it really. But it's in the book, but sometimes it's just
You running stuff through the Google.
Yeah, you for sure can't always count on the answers on those Quizlets out there. You have to, that's just,
Yeah.
but I have a
Yeah.
couple where I haven't been able to find them in the book too. So I've tried that method and it's not always but I find that although you give us the opportunity to interact with one another about these questions, there's a whole forum for it and it doesn't seem like it gets used. So
I never looking for it, Susan, to see if anybody was helping.
what did you say? Sorry.
That's weird because some classes use that forum all the time and then some classes don't. It's kind of up to the class. If I'm being honest, what I would do if I was y'all, if this was me, I would send out a message to everyone saying, hey, let's have a 30-minute Zoom and everybody get your study guide and let's go over some of these questions and see. That's what I would do.
And then
I've had classes do that too.
There's a message board for that.
There is.
I didn't know that until I was looking. So what is that? And then I saw it's midterm test like board or something. And then
Last time I looked, no one was commenting on. There was no, like in another class, I wrote something, but it was never responded to. So I just didn't try this time.
I'll post this Zoom if you guys want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if it was me, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Because that's what people like when we do this class in person. What's going to happen is people start bringing their study guides to class, and you'll see them all lined up, and they're all cussing me, asking about all the questions, because it's some stuff, especially application questions, that could be like the lifespan class. I'm about to get roasted. Everybody's about to roast me in there because that lifespan class, the questions, like it could be one of 2 answers sometimes, or at least you feel that way. That's actually not true, but it feels like it. But we should coordinate a Zoom. Yeah, do it.
Yeah, they take a long time. Like I think I worked, at least on the lifespan one, I worked 9 or 10 hours on it, just making sure I had all the answers. That way the test was less stressful. But
yeah, no. 18th. Is that right? Sorry to interrupt. We have till the 18th to complete it.
You have until the 7th. Well, 17th. I mean, you'll 11:59 p.m. on the 17th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for section part, we don't need to send you a video, right? I'll record it.
Nope, just a reflection.
Oh, okay. For the Hope Index, we can do that like a calculation, but there's no like a reference to what range, like what number to what number is mild or moderate or severe. Is any such kind of information we can find, or?
There's not. I was talking, Susan and I were talking about this actually at the very beginning. That particular assessment, there's not like some cutoff scores. And I actually gave that to you on purpose because I would think for the most part, the scores would be pretty high, or I mean, for this particular type of assessment. There's not cutoff scores for the Hearth.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And this is what I was saying earlier. There's a reason why I didn't give you like the Beck depression inventory, because what happens if someone scores like a 40 on that? Then we got real that's not good. As a student, I don't want you to have to mess with that. So I wanted you to work inside of a construct like Hope that's a little easier to kind of talk about, work through than working through depression or anxiety or something that throws you in the deep end of the ocean right off the bat. Any other questions? And Teresa's put her number out there if anybody wants to get together and do a study. And can you guys go on Moodle and send messages to the class? Can you do that? I know I can, but can you do that?
I think I do. Yeah.
Because you could do that too if you wanted to. Okay, now it's Saturday, August 6th. It's only going to be 97 degrees, cold front. Bundle up out there. Everybody stay warm. And I might see some of you here in about 15 minutes. And then some of you I might not see until, I don't know, sometime. I usually I'm the last class that you take too. So I'll see some of you at some point. All right. Everybody have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, you too.